Okay, so let's take a look at the last example now, which is by far the most complicated example. It's a bit of a contrived example. I just picked some rules off the top of my head and just kind of typed them out just to see what we'd get. And it's more complicated in some ways than you'd probably have in the real world, but at the same time, there are a lot of real world scenarios that are going to be very complicated because of just the sheer number of runways they have. If you look at some of the larger airports with multiple sets of parallel runways, you may end up with some pretty complex flows. This particular example has some requirements in it that are pretty unrealistic as far as aviation goes, but I just picked some examples that'll demonstrate WED features, not necessarily good aviation practices. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so in this example, we're gonna have two parallel or one set of parallel runways now. We're gonna have runway 18 left, 36 right, and 18 right, 36 left. In general, we're gonna favor south runways when there's southerly winds and north runways when there's northerly winds. And I say in general because there is one exception to that. Now, in this airport, it's basically the airport we've been building on before. The terminal's on the east side of the field. So runway 18 left, 36 right. We're going to keep that as the preferred runway for arrival so that once arrivals come in and land, they're right there at the terminal. Departures have to cross the arrival runway to head to 18 right, 36 left, which I'm going to call the outer runway. Now, the exception to that is that we want helicopters to use the inner runway. Maybe we don't want helicopters hover taxiing across the arrival stream, so we just want them to use the inner runway. And there's probably not going to be a lot of them, so it's easier just to get them out of our hair. Now, the next bullet says 36 right necessary for arrivals if in IFR conditions. So maybe, for example, 36 right is the only runway with an ILS, and regardless of what the winds are doing, we're going to use 36 right for arrivals. And it's not written, but let's also imply that we're just going to use the northerly flows when we're in IFR conditions. So we're going to use 36 right for arrivals and for helicopters, like the previous bullet says, and we'll use 36 left for departures. So even if there's a severe tailwind, we're just gonna go with it. So that's what I meant earlier when I said that it's not a very good aviation example. It's not something you'd actually do. But okay, so the last one says if we have south winds and we have a heavy aircraft and it's between the hours of 2200 Zulu and 500 Zulu, then we want heavy aircraft only to get a 270 heading on departure. So this is similar to what we did before, but we're being very specific now. That it just applies to heavy aircraft, it just applies to the south flow, it just applies to nighttime. So now that we're starting to get complicated, it's important that you start thinking about flows in a slightly different way. There's a lot of conditions here that are going to be used for our filters, but not all of them matter in selecting a flow. For instance, whether helicopters use 18 left or 18 right has nothing to do with the flow. That's a runway specific piece of criteria. The flow specific things are they have to be one of the four conditions that we talked about. It has to be either the ceiling and visibility, the wind, or time. So if there's any of those four things talked about, we're going to have to create a flow for each of those situations. But the runway specific things, the headings on departure, those are all runway things that don't matter for flows. So if we squinted this a bit, get a pen and paper and try to jot down which flows you think come out of this. It's a little bit more simple than some real world examples are going to be because our parallel runways are just north-south. There's no crossing runways. That's when things start getting complicated. But here, basically, we only have two conditions. Either we're running the north flow or running the south flow. And we have subconditions within the flows that apply to the runways. For instance, sometimes helicopters get the inside runway, or helicopters always get the inside runway. But that doesn't change the flow. So think we only have north or south. So what other ways do we have to break the north and south flows up in order to achieve all of our goals here? And the next thing I see is, we have IFR conditions. So now we have the IFR conditions only apply to the north flow. So now we can look at it that we have South VFR condition, or South VFR flow, a North VFR flow, and a North IFR flow. So that's basically 3 flows that we have so far. And the last thing I see is that we have a certain time condition, and that time condition only applies to one specific subset of aircraft, but regardless, it only applies to south winds. So it's only the south flow. So now, if we take one step back, we see that we have a North VFR flow, a South VFR flow, but it's not just South VFR, it's South VFR day and South VFR night. And then we have the North IFR flow. So you notice all the north flows, it doesn't matter what time they're happening. Time is not a factor in determining the north flows. Weather is a factor in determining the north flows because we have North VFR and North IFR. Now the opposite is true for the south flows. The south flows, weather means nothing to them. It's just time. So we have South VFR day and South VFR night. So we should be able to do this with 4 flows and a lot of runway conditions on those flows. So let's go to WED and let's try it, and hopefully this will make a little bit more sense. So here we are. We have our 2 runways. We have our airport selected. So let's start with how an air traffic controller would think. They always want to pick the flow that's the most simple, the most efficient for them. And that's going to be their main priority. So remember, flows get chosen by X-Plane by looking at the first flow in the list and then working your way down. So you want to put the most optimal thing first. Well, the most optimal thing is the simplest one right now, which is the North VFR flow. So let's create an airport flow. Let's call it North VFR. Okay, so we're going to put in our ICAO as usual. But now we've been leaving the ceiling visibility blank. But because this is North VFR, we want at least a 2,000 foot ceiling. And let's say we want at least a 3 statute mile visibility. Our pattern runway, we're to the north, so we're going to want to pick 36 right. Because arrivals are always going to be on 36 right. And left traffic is fine. So now we have our north flow visibility requirements set up. There are no other requirements for the north flow other than the wind. So let's go and get the wind set up. So we'll say north wind rule. Again, we're going to pick our ICAO here. And direction from, let's say we want to allow it from 270 to 090. So that covers the north. Thinking on a compass, you're going to go from west to north to east. So it's from west to east. And we're going to allow any wind at any speed here. So now the only conditions we have now are we have to have at least 2,000 miles for ceiling, or excuse me, at least 2,000 feet for a ceiling, at least 3 miles for visibility, and the wind has to be northerly, and it has to be less than 999 knots. If all that's true, we're going to fall into this north case. So notice there's no time rules or anything here. So now we need to pick what runways are going to be active in the north flow. So we're going to create a runway use. Let's skip the name just for a moment here. Let's deal with runway 36 left first. So runway 36 left, we said we always want departures on the left side. So we're going to say heavies, jets, turboprops, props. But I'm not going to check helicopters because we said we want helicopters on the inside runway, not on the outside runway. So we're going to leave it as all the other aircraft types except helicopters. Now for operations, we always want the outside runway to be for departures only. So we're going to select departures. We're not going to select arrivals. So now that we have that done, we can name this 36 departures. Okay, so that takes care of the departures. Now we need to handle the arrivals. So this is the first time we've done this. We're going to add another runway use. So now we have 2 runway usages inside this flow. We're going to call this 36 arrivals and helos. So we're going to pick 36 right, traffic type, we're going to pick... Well, actually, I'm making a mistake here. Let's just deal with arrivals first. 36 right, we're going to pick all traffic types here. And we're only going to pick arrivals. So now we're saying, doesn't matter what your type is, if you're arriving, you're going to be on 36 right. Let's be more clear with these numbers. Now we need a third runway rule, and we need that for departures for helicopters. So we're going to select our flow. We're going to create a runway use, and this one's going to be called 36 right helo departures. So 36 right, it's only helicopters, and we're picking departures. So now, if we take a step back and look at the rule we have, it's North VFR. We require VFR conditions based on ceiling and visibility. We require the wind to be northerly. And if those two are true, then this flow is going to become active. And when this flow is active, we have runway 36 that's going to be active, 36 left that's going to be active for everything except helicopters, only for departures. So if a jet calls up for departure and this flow is active, X-plane is going to look. The first rule it's going to see is, I can pick 36 left because he's a jet and he wants to depart. So that's the runway that it's going to get assigned. Now, if a jet calls for an arrival inbound, he's going to fall into this rule because 36 right says, I can take jets and I can take them for arrivals. Now, if a helicopter calls up for departure, he's going to fail this rule because we don't allow helicopters for departure in this rule. But this rule is going to catch him, this runway use, I should say. And we only allow helicopters to depart on 36 right. So you can see we needed 3 different runway usages. Now, here's the important point to note that I haven't pointed out yet because we've never used multiple usages within one flow. But multiple usages of runways are logically ORed. So if any of these are true, that one gets picked. They don't all have to be true. It's any one. The first one that's true gets picked, and that's how the runway ends up getting assigned. So that's our North VFR flow. So now we can move on. We'll continue on the VFR path. So we're going to do South VFR, but we need to be specific because there's South VFR day and South VFR night. So we're first going to we'll do day first. So we select our airport. We create an airport flow. We'll call this South VFR day. So we have to put our ICAO, our minimum ceiling, minimum visibility. Because it's south, we want people landing on 18 left, which is the inside runway, and left traffic is fine. And now we need to add a time rule because we say it's for VFR day. We've already made sure it was VFR. Now we need to make sure it's day. So we're going to create a time rule. We're going to call it day time rule. Just for the sake of argument here, let's say day is between 500 and 2200. And now we need our wind rule to make sure it's south winds that are only getting selected here. So if we create a wind rule, call it south wind rule, put our ICAO, and we're going to say from 090 now, from east all the way around the compass to west. And we're going to allow any speed. So now, if we have southerly winds, VFR conditions, and it's daytime, this flow is going to get chosen. So with this flow chosen, which runways are we going to allow? So let's add some runways. So the first runway that we'll create, let's see here. Let's do 18 left arrivals. Well, let's be consistent. Let's do the departures first. So we'll do 18 right departures. This is just like before. We pick 18 right. We're going to say we're going to allow all traffic types except helicopters for departures. So we have everything picked here except helicopters, and we've only chosen departures. So let's create our arrival rule now. So 18 left arrivals. 18 left is selected. We're allowing all types, including helicopters, to land on this runway only for arrivals. And now let's create our helicopter departure rule. So 18 left, helo departures. 18 left is selected. Only helicopters can depart on this runway. Okay, and that's that. So the next rule we'll do is the South VFR night. So we're going to create, got to select our airport, create a new flow, South VFR night. Now I do want to point out the order of these, the order of the runways matter, and the order of the flows matter. Again, X-Plane is going to look at them from order top down. It's going to choose the first one that matches. So the order is very important. Now, if you didn't have this all written down on notes ahead of time, where you've got everything logically scored away, if you're just kind of doing piece by piece and you make a mistake and you say, oh, you know what, I want night to be here, you can drag and move night to the top. We actually want it. We want it here after all of these, but the same is true for the runways. You can move them around. So make sure you're getting the order done properly. Okay, so South VFR night. Just go through this quickly here. Make sure we have VFR conditions. It's south, so we still want 18 left to be our pattern runway. Left traffic. Let's create our time rule. Now, again here, I probably don't have to put the time because the only reason South VFR day would fail is if the time wasn't correct. But let's just be specific and say it's going to be from 2200 to 500. We'll call this nighttime. Oops. Nighttime rule. Okay, we'll set up the winds. It doesn't hurt to be too specific as long as you're, as long as you catch all situations or have a catch-all flow at the very end. So we're going to create our south wind rule. And okay, so here's where we have to be careful now. So we're still departing 18 right, but we're going to break the departures down even farther than we did before. We're going to allow jets, turboprops, props. We're not allowing helicopters because those are going on 18 left. And we're not allowing heavy jets just yet. And you'll see why in a moment. So right now, jets, turboprops, and props can depart from runway 18 right. So let's create another departure rule. 18 right, heavy departures. Okay, so we pick 18 right. We're only going to pick heavy. We're only going to allow departures. And now what we said is we wanted heavies at night to fly an ATC assigned heading of 270. So now hopefully you can see why we didn't put it in this runway usage, because in this runway usage we're dealing with all the other aircraft that don't have to make any special turn. This rule says we're only allowing heavy jets to depart this runway and they have to fly this heading. So again, once this flow is active, all of these runways become operational, and ATC is going to pick the first one that matches the conditions for the aircraft that's calling in. So if a heavy's calling in and we're in a South VFR night configuration, it's going to try this one. It's going to say, oh, that rule doesn't accept heavies. And it's going to try this one and say, this one does accept heavies, but I have to give them a 270 heading. All right, so let's take care of our arrivals now. So we're going to allow all aircraft for arrivals. And now we'll take care of the helicopters again. Just want to make sure I got the right runways here. Okay. So we're saying helicopters can depart 18 left. Okay, so that's our South VFR night. We only have one more left. I'm going to close these up just so we have some more room here. Select our airport, and we'll make one last flow. And this is the North IFR. So now, the only way we would have gotten here is if we failed all of these three. And the only way we should fail all these three is if we're not in VFR conditions. Because we have day and night covered here. So if the winds was from the south, then one of these two would have taken it. This one doesn't have any time requirement. So regardless of what day or time it was, whether it was day or night, this one would have covered all wind conditions from the north. So the only way we would get here is if it failed the ceiling or visibility test. So we're going to say we'll allow anything from the ground up, whatever you got, but we know because of the order that we have these that it must be IFR conditions out. And because of the north flow, we're going to want 36 right to be our pattern runway. And we're going to create the wind rule. And we don't care about time of day here, so now we just create our runway uses. So this is just like before where we have we're going to pick everything here except helicopters again. Only for departures. So we're going to allow all arrivals on 36 right. And one more. We're going to allow helicopters to depart this runway. And that's it. So we have 4 flows now. And those 4 flows handle all the conditions in the contrived example I made up there.